All right. This is my seventh Hangout on my channel, Jerb the Humanist on YouTube. Hopefully my audio is coming through clear. Um, uh, and I am updating a few things. And as a note, I did say last week that I'd get my audio with Ryan Bell on a podcast feed. Um, my current laptop is damaged, and so I won't be able to upload that audio anytime soon. But as soon as I get that fixed, I'll upload that audio to my podcast feed and this audio to my podcast feed. But that's getting all the housekeeping out of the way. Um, uh, Today I am joined with Juhem Navarro-Rivera. He is the political research director and managing partner at Socioanalytica Research, a senior fellow at the Institute for Humanist Studies, and particularly important for what we want to talk about today, he's a co-chair for the Latinx Humanist Alliance. So welcome, Juhem. Thanks for coming onto the channel. Glad to have you.
Thanks to you.
Absolutely. Now, what I really want to start off with first, last week I had Ryan Bell on, and it was the day before the midterm elections, and we were gritting our teeth. At that one, and I know you're a political science, and you're happy to talk politics all day long. I'd like to hear, since this is topical, what are your thoughts on last week's midterms?
Well, I had my escape plan. my my wife was it's traveling right now in Mexico visiting family, and I told her she had to leave on the day of the election. So I told her, well, I'll let you know if I'm joining you or not, depending on whether Republicans won seats in the House, which I didn't expect, but it was like stranger things have happened, as we all know. And then when she called me that she arrived safely at night, I told her we're not moving, so you gotta come back. But I mentioned this to mostly to my secular and other friends in Facebook in a message there, which is that I think I've seen a lot of, I'm not sure if it's despair, but people are not very happy with the results, or they were expecting something bigger, like a blue ginormous day after tomorrow tsunami or something like that. But in reality, given how the maps were drawn after 2010, given that, I mean, Republicans may just win one seat in the Senate after being like essentially a net one seat gain, which is ridiculous given how favorable the map was to them. And the fact that I think a lot of people are looking at this through the lens of Stacey Abrams, Beto O'Rourke, and Andrew Gillum. And I wasn't really planning in my expectations for all of them to win. And actually, my plan was for none of them to win. Although, like, closing the gap in those states in a really interesting way. And we are in three if we count Bill Nelson in the Senate, like really out of this world results. Like, they're still frozen in time. And Beto, like, I didn't think he was gonna get in reality within 5 points of Ted Cruz. So I think those three races shaped a lot of the narrative for a lot of people, and they haven't seen like all the great ballot initiatives that that were passed, particularly the one in Florida, voting felon reenfranchisement. That I'm actually pretty happy because the person leading that fight is a good friend, and so I think at the end of the day it was a finally as the models sort of predicted, so they actually work out fine this year. And given how the economy is good for Wall Street, not necessarily for the average person out there right now.
Hmm.
But you like all the indicators that should have suggested that it shouldn't be this big of a win.
Hmm.
And in the end, like I think it, the at least for those of us who like the day after the 2016 election uh, woke up in fetal position, I think it's the country is a much better shape right now,
Hmm.
politically at the state level, and certainly with a House of Representatives that is not gonna rubber stamp whatever the president does.
Yeah. Well, as far as that Florida ballot initiative goes, considering how much of a swing state is Florida is, like that has a huge potential to shift elections, especially in 2020. Um, and I as far as the blue wave goes, I think most progressives, at least, were hoping for just a repudiation of Trump and his policies en masse, just because of how horrible it was. Just like a giant, the giant, the whole country as a collective, just saying "fuck you" to this administration. Maybe that's unrealistic. I don't know, but I certainly think it has. It 538 calls it a wave. So I
I,
guess.
I call it a wave. I think it is a wave. I mean, I think the president still has 40-ish% approval. So it's like just reputation is not going to come in the ways that we would like.
Yeah. All right. Well, I could be punditing with you all day on this, and I think you could too. But I wanted to get your opinion on that. So it sounds like between last hangout and this one, things ended up pretty okay. But I do. Let's get to some of your work, and especially touching on the Latinx Humanist Alliance. First of all, how do people say it? Is it Latinx?
I would say it is Latinx. That's how I pronounce it. Not that I'm an authority,
Uh-huh.
definitely not in linguistics, but that's how I've heard it pronounced. That's how I pronounce it.
Hmm.
And I mean, not especially linguistic snobs are not very happy with the term, but that makes me even more happy. Uh,
Yeah, that's okay. And I was fairly politically aware in 2016, um, when the American Humanist Association set up the Feminist Humanist Alliance, the Black Humanist Alliance, and the LGBTQ Humanist Alliance. I hope I'm getting those names right. And I thought it was a good initiative, at least for pulling uh, people who you don't normally see in secular circles, pulling them into the community. And I thought they were pretty necessary. Unfortunately, they got a lot of backlash, but I try not to pay attention to that. But has setting up the Latinx Humanist Alliance gone similarly? Like, how's starting it up been, and how have your initial projects been going?
so yeah, so I mean the thing with those is that they were already kind of like legacy groups
Hmm.
because they was just reconstituted. Uh, and so I think it was just the reboot that they already existed. It's not like there was something new that AHA was trying, except in the way that they were organized.
Hmm.
Um, but with us, I think Luciano Gonzalez, who is the other co-chair, has been more active in these few first weeks after the launch. I'm not sure how much pushback he has gotten. I've seen a few of the Facebook groups, people either complaining about the term Latinx, or like another race-based group and whatnot. But for the most part, I have seen it's mostly positive. We have gotten some attention, some people wanting to join, which I think it's a good thing. So at this point in my life, I'm old enough and cranky enough that I'm more interested in building communities. And if you don't like it, then don't join it.
Yeah.
And so if you want to work with us and you're interested in being an SJW part time, then like welcome to the group. And but in general, if you're just interested in complaining about either names of groups or you think the status quo is great, then this is definitely not the organization for you.
Yeah. Well, that's fairly insubstantial criticism, as is par for the course with these things. Just I don't know. I think a lot of the criticism, I don't know,
Yeah.
it comes from a white male perspective, and I think both of us know that atheism or even like humanism has like a legacy of you know a lot of white leadership, a lot of male leadership, um, and from what I've seen, a lot of the work is put in by people behind the scenes, and then the speakers and attendees of like the AHA conference just tend to be white guys celebrating white guys, and it's really unfortunate that we don't want to put a spotlight on more of these other speakers, especially um, in demographics where um, humanism isn't as representative. Like you're going to get more bang for your buck that way, like winning over people when like there's so much potential at least. So
Yeah, and that now that you mentioned speakers, like that's one of our first projects is actually creating a speakers bureau of humanists, Latinx people,
mhm,
Latino men, Latino women, can actually, uh, whether by geography, by topic,
mhm,
can actually be a representative voice of their community, and to show that we just go beyond British white old dudes
mhm.
in this particular group, and the fact that if and this is some of the research I have done over the years. I mean, a lot of the growth of the knowns, as they're popularly known, it's coming in this last decade from a lot of women and people of color who are leaving religion and essentially ignoring their voices and ignoring their the need for these groups to have a community. It's detrimental to the larger movement.
Yeah, and I have noticed that you I looked through your publications because I'm an academic as well. So and I do actually have some questions about that demographic shift, because every atheist knows the stats on the nuns, like it's the largest growing demographic, blah blah blah. And that's true. I don't see that slowing down. And of course that's going to include Latinx people. But what since you are probably one of the best people to ask this, I want to know maybe a few things. One, is there like a growing surge of Latinx atheists? And um, because we both know, a lot of Latinx culture is associated with, Catholicism, and other religions, but also I would like to know how that shift is comparing to that mainstream shift at large, like that, 20% plus growth. And also, I want to know to what extent millennials are contributing to that, considering that we are one of the most a-religious populations in the country. So I know I threw a lot at you at that, but it seems like this is all in your wheelhouse.
Yeah, so I can't give you exact figures right now, mostly because, as I told you before we started, my computer is overworking right now.
Oh
So
no.
it's if I add another command to this like program I'm running, I'm just gonna see a lot of smoke coming out of my computer at this point.
Uh-huh.
Um, but and actually, what I'm running is some code running research on knowns actually. So uh, creating a database. But off the top of my head, so among Latinx people, the it's probably around 20% now, according to Pew and PRI. So that's known. Atheists, I don't actually have exact figures. I know it's larger just by virtue of the larger group getting, the wider known community getting bigger in those groups, but I don't know the exact figure for that. And as you suggested, yeah, among millennials, I've seen numbers, and I actually posted a blog a couple of weeks ago, actually like 3 or 4 weeks ago, uh, during Hispanic Heritage Month, about the Latinx knowns, and it's particularly high. It's around a third of Latinx no millennials are, or actually not millennials, because I mean people keep talking about millennials.
Yeah.
About like they're a bunch of young kids, but I mean I'm a borderline millennial and I just turned 40. So
Mhm.
um,
Yeah, I make that mistake too. I think the end of the millennials are graduating from college now, I guess. So we've got to talk about like the sub millennials, I guess. But I guess
yeah,
young people in general.
exactly. So among the younger people, that's the interesting thing is that they're essentially divided. So Latinos in general are essentially divided about one third Catholic, one third Protestant, and one third non-religious among the younger cohort.
Hmm.
Uh, and then you see like the shift; it's smaller as you age, or as an older age groups. Like this majority Catholic in the oldest cohort, and then in this like age group, let's say probably my age group, 40 to 50 or so, like you see a larger cohort of Protestants that you see, and then like there's a little bit more competition between Catholics and the nones. And it's mostly because the growth among the Latinx nones has mostly come from essentially Catholics stop saying they're Catholic.
Hmm.
Uh, I think that we're seeing a newer wave among the younger people who are, were raised in Protestantism, particularly evangelicals or Pentecostals, who are also leaving religion, but that's at a slower pace than like Catholics have been leaving religion among Latinx.
Hmm. So it sounds like among the youth in the Hispanic population, uh, there's more nuns than in the general population, even, which is still pretty huge. And I think that's kind of that's really interesting. So even making that comparison is uh, I guess it shows that we're growing, which is good. Yeah. So you were saying one of your projects was to uh, implement more speakers across the country, have a speakers list. Um, are there any other projects for the Humanist Alliance that you want to
Uh,
focus on?
Off the top of my head, that's the first one because it's not the most onerous to do, particularly toward the end of the year. So that's been working on. There is the other thing that we want to focus also is, which is a little bit related to the speakers, which but speakers kind of bureau is more for a movement centered uh, project, but in general, one of the things that we want to do is increase the visibility of Latinx knowns, particularly in the Latinx community, because there is, all these discussions about like the Latinx vote and like, uh, particularly among young people, and a lot of the discussions center around religion and like Catholicism and abortion, which, by the way, Latino Catholics and I don't think liberal Catholics in general care about the issue. That's a kind of like more of a bishops kind of thing, and conservative Catholics kind of thing, and it's more of a white conservative Catholic kind of thing. Um, and a lot of discussions about Pentecostalism and evangelicals in the Latinx community, which, I mean, they're definitely a large cohort. But I've been having these discussions with other academics about whether, like, my assumption, or my, not my assumption, but my analysis of Pentecostals and evangelicals in the Latinx communities is that they have already reached their peak in terms of numbers and conversions, and that mostly happened in the 80s and 90s. And so now what we're seeing is this wave of the knowns that people are not talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it's all the nuns can talk about sometimes, but no, it's good. I think that the Visibility Project sounds really important. My intuition, and take it or leave it, because hell if I know what I'm talking about half the time. But my intuition is that visibility may not only be important for, social justice change in terms of like identity politics or whatever, um, like in terms of like giving rights to minorities. I think visibility might even be the most important thing. Um, but I know there's a lot of disagreement. I might be pitting atheists against each other. I know David Tamayo is a huge proponent of education. He seems to think that a lot of social issues come down to a lack of education. And another atheist of color, Alex Jules, really disputes that. And I'm kind of on the Alex Jules side, but what do you think? Do you think education is part of the most important, or do you think visibility is more important, or do you have a different, more nuanced answer?
Um, so back in the day, and I'm not sure if I have a stance, so I'm just winging it as I go right now. Uh, I know David. I've known David for a few years, and I like him a lot. And
Mm-hmm.
he, actually, my wife was in the Halfree board for a couple of years. Um, I think education matters, but to the extent that how we define education is a whole different set of, uh, kind of like a whole different kind of worms. And I usually think about, like, Liberty University is an educational institution. So what kind of education people are getting, I think there's more nuance into that, or like, how people need to read. Well, there's like the Left Behind books.
Mm-hmm.
They good? Well, I'm actually, they're quite entertaining. I read the first one, but uh, but again, like, there's just, there's just more nuance within that broader category. And then the visibility, like, I think it's very important, uh, because, for example, like a decade ago, like when I started blogging, like the reason I started blogging was because I couldn't see any other Latino atheists out there. And I just, like, and I met a lot of people that way, like, oh, I didn't know there were other Latino atheists. And so I think that visibility is important in that regard, right? Like, a lot of people can see that they're not alone. And I think it particularly in communities where, what I would say, like, in the Latinx community, for example, there's this stereotype that everybody is religious, when the reality is a little bit more nuanced. But a lot of people believe that stereotypes, even if they are not religious. And they're afraid of coming out as non-religious, or just say like, I don't really care about this kind of stuff. Either because of, they fear people are going to be angry at them, or they're going to be ostracized in some kind of way. So I think that visibility is important, so it can show people that it is, that it is okay to be that way.
Hmm.
And I mean, I go even further. Like, I didn't really, like, my awakening as an atheist was like reading the God Delusion. I mean, I actually threw the book away recently because I just can't stand Richard Dawkins anymore. But I mean, I think even that, at that level, that's kind of like the push I kind of needed.
Hmm.
And sometimes I wish that, instead of keep throwing the same stones he's been throwing for 15 years, he had done something more interesting or more constructive to build a movement, rather than to just like do the same shtick. But I mean, I guess like he's an old guy. And,
Hmm. Well, he's a case example of somebody who's very highly educated and really intelligent, but also has very problematic views, which kind of points to, education isn't everything, and I think we can agree with that. Um, Probably. I mean, I don't. You're an academic too, and I have you come across, even in your sociology field,
political science.
or political science. Sorry, uh, I I often mix up those two. In your political science field, particularly looking at race and politics, do you still regularly come across people with problematic views that?
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, there's like the people who don't think that race matters in American politics, even though probably the last 2 years have put a lid on that
Mhm.
discussion. And then there's even among like political scientists of color who don't really understand how religion affects all of this, and the nuances within religion. So yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that they're necessarily problematic views, but they're certainly blind spots
Mhm.
uh, that shape a lot of or affect a lot of the discussion that goes on.
Hmm. Yeah. Now, it's good, and I think it's good to build communities of Latinx people, for atheists. But I'm wondering, and I know there's sort of a stigma if you're black and you come out as atheist, um, you're almost renouncing your blackness. There's that sort of cultural sense among the black community. Is there a similar sense, like based on what you were talking about, the anxiety of coming out, and trying to exist in the Hispanic or Latinx world?
I think it depends. I mean, I think for a lot of Catholics in particular who like they're were baptized at some point when they were infants and then like never stepped on a church again, it's a little easier than if you're a person with doubts about God and you're in a Pentecostal church where like most of the people who attend that church are your neighbors and your family.
Hmm.
And so that's a that's it's a very those are very different demographics, and why we shouldn't uh address groups like if they were monolithic, because there's a lot of nuance in there. And the way I would address someone like me, actually, who was raised Catholic but never, I mean, even though I went to Catholic schools, never really bought into the thing. It's very different from someone who literally their whole social network
Hmm.
and their whole life, it's based on that particular religious community. That's a whole different leap that you have to make. Uh, and so that's why I think that the existence of these kind of groups, it's what matters, not just in terms of like people who are non-religious but don't know about humanism, and then they like they get curious about it, but to for a lot of people for to have these kind of like safe spaces where they can come, and they don't have to become members. They don't have to join necessarily, but they can be fellow travelers and see if if this is the path that they want to go. Because I think we we tend to underestimate the process of becoming non-religious and breaking, like just becoming an atheist and an open humanist or activist
Hmm.
within the movement. Like, going from being a kid who goes to church every Sunday and has a very religious family to the other side, it's quite a journey.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, a lot of those things are certainly relatable to um, lots of different demographics, including white atheists. So, in fact, I relate to that somewhat strongly too. Leaving a huge social group as a function of your religious belief. So, I think that should build sympathy for otherwise, disparaging critics. Not like we have to pay attention to them. Um, I this is another question that I would like your insight of, particularly as a political scientist and a person of color. I think there's been a lot of cynicism over the past couple of years regarding movement atheism, and obviously, just because your metaphysics becomes more realistic doesn't mean your social or political views are going to change with that. Um, and there's been a lot of infighting, and I really want your opinion on this. Do you think, um, aside from building communities where people can grow and gather support from each other, like interpersonally from person to person, besides that, do you think there is potential for further humanist change, like in many parts of the country, including my area of Denver? A lot of political motion is implemented by like faith communities, particularly progressive political action. And even if we don't agree on people's metaphysics, it would be nice to have that sort of mobility for positive social change coming from humanism. And I'm wondering if you think that humanism has that potential, or like once you lose that ontology of like having a purpose in life, or motion, like it's not a very good grounding for political change.
No, totally disagree. So the thing is, I don't see churches, especially in the political arena, as theological groups that, I mean, they probably, they have some theology behind them to get them organized and whatnot. But at
Hmm.
the end of the day, like, religious groups are interest groups.
Hmm.
And so if you look at politics from a very secular, and by secular I don't mean movement secularism, but essentially, like, as a human non-religious endeavor, uh, yeah, like, humanists should get organized as an interest group. And I mean, I just saw, I mean, a few list of different organizations, and I saw the Secular Coalition just sent a blast that they're creating new tools and launching new tools for political action, which I think it's very good. Um, and I think one of the biggest concerns by me is that I think a lot of groups are want to get political, but they also want to remain apolitical, kind of like,
Hmm.
or non-partisan, which of course some of it has IRS implications, but in general, they want to remain non-ideological, and I think that is a recipe for inaction.
Hmm.
That is okay. Yeah, I would say, like, my favorite example is like the secular values voter. Like, what does that even mean? I mean, I think it's a good campaign in general, like for get people engaged, but I'm not sure if I've seen evidence that people who otherwise are not engaged uh, are getting activated by that kind of stuff. And, and so I think we need to like be real about what is, what we want to do as a movement, and we may have to split. Like, you may have like conservatives and libertarians want to do their own thing, and progressive want to do their own thing, and that's fine. I mean, there's a religious left and a religious right. uh, I mean, if you look at as interest groups that are ideological, well, yeah, it may be that on matters of church and state, like all the secular groups come together, and then on matters of social policy, progressive groups, secular groups have to join progressive religious groups. Like I don't think that is a problem. That's how you build coalitions, and that's how you shift power, and you create change. And if that means that within ourselves we have to be adversaries at some point, well, so be it. That's politics.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's leftism in general too. So, um, you know, but so it does sound like you think that humanism is a project worth pursuing in general, like as a mobilizing force. Then is that correct to say then?
Yes, I think we should just have like in this sense like membership organizations and whatnot. I think my big uh, my big dream is to have a big humanist think tank that can actually go head to head with the with this Heritage Foundation without doing the crazy stuff, and essentially like a place where politicians come and ask for advice, or where presidents come for and governors come for suggestions for appointees to federal judgeships and state judgeships and whatnot. Or like where we're actually a group that is not just demographically important, but also politically important. And not just because it has votes, but also because it has clout.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and with that demographic shift that keeps coming up that I keep mentioning, it would be nice, like if we could, organize communities, especially as that 20% or so grows, you know, um, the UU church, like that could function as some sort of organizing force. But it would be really nice to have, you know, like coalitions that not only care about human progress and progressive political change, but also things like critical thinking and evaluating of science that seems to be missing sometimes, just occasionally from progressives, not entirely, but. You know. And it is notable that there are coalitions like the secular values voter. There's also like the atheist voter campaign, or what is it? The atheist voter. I can't even no
Yeah, there's atheist voter.
atheist candidate project is what I'm thinking of. So I think I have a friend he might be Latino actually. Andre Sales. I don't know if work with him, but he seems also fairly knowledgeable on these demographics. And he's in Arizona, and they just got well, I shouldn't say just got, but they reinstated Senator Juan Mendez in office, who's been in since I think 2014, which I think is pretty exciting. Who's an openly atheist candidate. So I don't know if you've been following that, but I think it's
Yeah,
fun.
no, Arizona is one of the best organized states in terms of secular politics. Like they don't only have Juan Mendez, they have Athena Salman, who actually is interesting. One of the things I'm working on right now with this database I'm building is like doing some analysis, and I believe Mendez is in Arizona Senate District 26, which Salman actually took his seat when he moved out to the Senate. He was in the House.
Hmm.
But in Arizona, contrary to everywhere else in the country, Senate districts and House districts are exactly the same. They just have two representatives and one senator in those seats. And so essentially, with Salman and Mendez, that is the most secular district in the country, at least in terms of representation,
Right.
where two of the three representatives in that particular district are actually openly secular. And there are a few more in Arizona, as I was looking at the Center for Free Thought Equality data uh, that have been secular at the local level, at the legislative level. So it's a very interesting place.
Hmm. As someone from Arizona, that blows my mind, but Arizona's kind of it's a weirder state than people give it credit for. But like that is in the the valley, like near it's I think it intersects with Maricopa County. I could be wrong, but uh, like that is where Joe Arpaio is from, and like there's a huge contingent in Arizona of like um, baby boomers who are retiring, coming from the Midwest. It's a weird state, and it's kind of fascinating that there's such what you're telling me because I'm from there and it's so conservative in general, or at least very libertarian too. So I don't know. Um, yeah, like uh, what else did I wanted to ask about? I do I do uh, want uh, I do want to ask about have if you've had any problems focusing on some of these progressive pushes because like we were talking about the demographics of atheism and secularism and humanism, and there does tend to be, I don't think it tends to be Republican, but it tends to, there's very few Republicans from what I can tell, but there's still right-wing presence in the form of like political libertarianism at all. And do you think that ties into um, like this recipe for inaction among humanist communities, or like do you think it's like an actively it's detrimental to like the changes we want to see in the world?
So I think so. I have a particular analysis of the whole like politics of the
Hmm.
knowns, so to speak. So there are few Republicans, and actually the percentage of Republicans has gone down over years. Like a lot of, but also the percentage of Democrats hasn't actually gone particularly up. So you have a lot of fairly conservative knowns who are stopping to identify as Republicans, as it, especially starting in the 90s, as it essentially became a Christian party, and now more people leaving now they have decided to go full fascist.
Yeah.
Uh, but there's always, and when I was at PRI a few years back, we did an analysis, a survey, which we kind of like measured libertarianism in the United States. And one of the things that we didn't find many libertarians in the country in general. Like, I mean, we defined what was a libertarian, so it wasn't just calling yourself a libertarian.
Hmm.
So we used like kind of like some issue measures and whatnot. But the interesting part was that the libertarian cohort in that survey was very non-religious. So there's, I think there's an aspect of libertarianism and non-religiosity that goes hand in hand, which I think there's an element of authority going on in there, right? Like not caring for authority in any sense, including religious authority. Not that many of the people who consider themselves libertarian at large in the country are that way. Red Bull. But there's at least politically, like most of the, especially people who vote, are overwhelmingly toward the liberal side. And one of the things that has happened that we also don't discuss a lot in the country at large is that if you look at the Gallup surveys, and actually just got out a book chapter on humanism and the challenge of difference, edited by Professor Anthony Pinn.
I love Anthony Pinn. I should talk to him sometime.
So I had a book chapter in there titled "Beyond Church and State," which the chapter was written before my blog, but the academic press's work.
Yes.
The book just came out, and one of the things that, again, like we don't discuss a lot in mainstream politics discourse, is that the Gallup surveys have been finding a steady increase of the people self-identifying as liberal. And as much as I hate these like self-identity labels, and I wrote a whole dissertation about that, they do actually give you some cues. And the interesting part is that the increase of the liberal label has come thanks to young people, and my analysis says that it's young secular people. So essentially, like, this cohort is changing the way we see politics in this country, and we just keep ignoring it. Going back to conservatives, I think there's a cohort. I think it's more vocal than it is numeric. And I think it shapes a lot of the discussion. I remember having this conversation with Greta Christina in a conference, which is that a lot of the conservative discourse is more about stopping things from happening and discouraging people from trying to enact change than is actually about doing anything.
Yeah.
So it's not even a conservative that is reactionary. It's more like a status quo, but status quo is a movable target, and they're just fine with whatever the status quo is at any point in time. Which I think at some point, I mean, if we bring the communist revolution, they will just be for it, because that's going to be the status quo at some point.
Right. Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, I don't agree that you could probably break down some Republicans who, by that measure, aren't conservative in the least due to the hard right push. But like, I do think there is like an anti-authoritarian bent. Like, there's at least that appeal to atheism, especially when you just get out. It's like, oh, I don't have to follow the Bible. I don't have to follow my religious leaders anymore. Like, you can't tell me what to do. And it's kind of disappointing that anti-authoritarian bent, by my opinion, is not as holistically skeptical of authority figures. It's skeptical of like religious and political authority, but or I should say like state authority, but less so focused on like, the power of corporations, the power of like your boss and things like that, or the power of like large corporate donors. And it's really disappointing that like, by some measures, I'm a bit libertarian too. Like, I think I'm more of a libertarian socialist, but like, I think that anti-authoritarianism comes from a good, genuine place. But since like they're so white, basically the biggest authorities they've seen that are visible are just the government telling them what to do. And I think it's disappointing that, they don't take into account other perspectives, or like authorities that are still there but aren't aren't as visibly authorities or whatever. But
Yeah, no, I think there. So one thing I really vexes me, but not really. It's the fact that a lot of people in the larger like secular community are very good at questioning like religion, but the kind of like what you're saying, like really stop about other cultural
mhm,
uh, dominance factors. And so, they're not skeptical about race, they're not skeptical about gender, they're not even, as you say, they're skeptical about the power of businesses.
mhm,
um, and I find that fascinating that there's your questioning of authority and your questioning of societal norms starts and stop at this particular aspect. And essentially, and I think it has to do a lot with the worldview in which religion is the worst thing that there ever was, and once you get rid of religion, you get rid of everything else. uh, and ergo, if I'm not religious, I cannot be a racist because I don't quote stuff about slavery in the Bible, and like I don't care if women cannot be priests, and so ergo I'm not a sexist. uh,
yeah, like that level of critical thinking, like I don't know, the buck stops at religion. So I do know. I said we'd be on for an hour, but you said you have to attend to your kids soon, so we can wrap up in the next couple minutes. But was there anything else you wanted to touch on, especially promoting the Latinx Alliance, or anything that you wanted to touch that I didn't get to before we go?
yeah, I think in terms of the alliance, so the two main projects, one is the one in terms of intra movement, this speakers bureau, and the second one is a larger in terms of the Latinx community, this visibility project. But also, as we grow and we get a better sense of what our capabilities are going to be, it is eventually to that I was talking earlier, like plugging into coalitions, like having humanist presence in political movements, not just going essentially to marches, but I come from outside of the humanist world that I also inhabit. I come from the public policy world in Washington D.C. of all places, and so there's a lot of action at the state and local and federal levels that it's going on, and we have a lot of religious groups involved in these coalitions in issues that don't necessarily have to be religious, or that seem uh, that people of faith should care or not. And I don't see humanist presence in those.
Mhm,
I mean, I know a lot of people who are personally non-religious and are active in their communities and they're part of other groups, but not necessarily use their secular identity to be active in the community. And I would like to shift that a little bit and have like this humanist presence in political coalitions and in policy discussions that we not normally see.
mhm,
And so I think for us, the Latinx Humanist Alliance is going to be one of those vehicles, especially within the larger Latinx community where there are coalitions and you have like your Pentecostals and you have your Catholics and you have like your immigrant groups. And so having, and labor groups, so having a humanist presence in that, I think will also help not just increase the visibility of Latinx humanists, but also help us build some street cred.
mhm. That sounds good. Well, I just realized I wasn't following Latinx Humanists on Twitter. That's at Latinx Humanists. So I'll be keeping an eye on whatever projects you're doing. I am a member of the AHA, and I did get involved with some of the social justice initiatives when that came out in 2016. So if there's ever like probably a phone bank or something that you or whatever, I'll be happy to join in for that or something. But I'm it sounds like it's been kicking off, and I wish you luck with all the projects. Like I sincerely hope it goes well for you guys.
Thank you.
So, yeah. All right. Well, do you want to plug your Twitter handle or whatever else you want to plug before we go?
Yeah, sure. You can follow me at UMNR on Twitter. It's JUHEMNR.
And you
And
you have the best username on Twitter as
I
of
just
right now.
changed it. I just changed it because I was communicating with somebody serious and I had to change it. I'm gonna take it back to Department of Grievance Studies.
Yes.
And
As a
uh,
political scientist, you are very well versed in grievance studies, as I'm aware. So.
oh yeah, yeah. I I want to be the dean of grievance studies in the James Lindsay School of Grievance.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah, I see you changed your username to Juhem Navarro-Rivera, PhD, which I hope to be able to do one day, probably within the next year. So sorry for that interruption. I just wanted to compliment you on that fantastic
Yeah, I'll
user.
change it back. I just needed to do something serious on Twitter for a few minutes.
Okay, I'm sorry. Go on with the rest of your plugs.
But yeah, so Twitter Juhemnr, JUHEMNR, and my blog is Beyond Church and State, where I try to write at least once a week. Trying to do some analysis of politics or demographics, and it's at the Orbit, the atheist network, blog network, and you can go at the-orbit.net uh, /Beyond Church and State.
All right.
Or you can go to Twitter and link it from there.
Yeah, that's how I intend to do it.
Yeah.
Juem, thank you so much for talking to me. It's been a pleasure, and I think I learned a lot. So
Uh, Thank you to you.
I appreciate it. You have a good day.
You too.